More secretly recorded video clips of the US Republican nominee are released as Mitt Romney scrambles to get his campaign back on track. What are we learning about his view of the world? You're watching Inside Story US 2012 from Washington. Hello, I'm Shihab Ratansi. Mitt Romney thought he was just speaking to wealthy donors who'd paid $50,000 each to attend a fundraiser. But on Monday, the magazine Mother Jones leaked video clips which some political pundits say could seriously damage his campaign.
There are 47% of the people who will vote for the president no matter what. All right, there are 47% who are with him, who are dependent upon government, who believe that they're victims, who believe that government has a responsibility to care for them, who believe that they're entitled to health care, to food, to housing, to you name it.
In an impromptu press conference soon after the tape was released, Romney said his words were, quote, not elegantly stated, but didn't withdraw them. And just hours later, more video clips were released. This time, Romney was speaking about foreign policy.
I look at the Palestinians not wanting to see peace anyway, for political purposes, committed to the destruction and elimination of Israel, and these thorny issues, and I say there's just no way.
These clips come after a string of blunders and negative stories about his campaign, which might be having an impact. Some recent polls show Romney trailing Obama in several key states. So can Mitt Romney overcome the current campaign turmoil? To discuss this, we're joined from Madison, Wisconsin by John Nichols, political writer for The Nation magazine. From Boston, Massachusetts, we have Scott Helman, co-author of the biography The Real Romney. And here in the studio, we're joined by John Feehery, former spokesman to Republican Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert. Scott Helman, it has been noticed that he did seem to be very comfortable, Mitt Romney, in answering the questions from his donors, in marked contrast to some of his other public appearances, or his public appearances, in fact. Is this finally the real Romney, then, do you think?
Well, I certainly think we saw a glimmer of it. I mean, here is somebody who often expresses a very binary view of the world. You know, you're either with the United States or you're against the United States. You're either somebody who builds his own enterprise or you're somebody who relies on the government for handouts. So I think you saw, of course, an unintentionally candid version here of Mitt Romney. And I do think to some extent, as his video attests, I think this is how he feels and reflects, probably with a great deal of accuracy, his worldview. So, you know, these fundraiser videos are always great because these candidates are speaking, expecting to not be seen except for the people in this room. And I think we're getting a very revealing and, for Mitt Romney, a very damaging revelation here at a time when he could very much ill afford it.
All right, well, let's hear a little bit more of one of the more, what some are suggesting are the more damaging passages from the tape. Here's his view of the 47% who aren't paying income tax.
They will vote for this president no matter what. And I mean, the president starts off with 48, 49, 40, he starts off with a huge number. These are people who pay no income tax. 47% of Americans pay no income tax. So our message of low taxes doesn't connect. And he'll be out there talking about tax cuts for the rich. I mean, that's what they sell every 4 years. And so my job is not to worry about those people. I'll never convince them that they should take personal responsibility and care for their lives. What I have to do is convince the 5 to 10% in the Senate that are independent.
And it is true that 47%, or actually 46.4% of Americans pay no federal income tax, but this does break down into 28.3% who do pay payroll taxes, which are generally deducted from paychecks and go towards Medicare and Social Security. They simply don't earn enough to pay income tax. 18.1% of households didn't pay income or payroll taxes. 10.3% of them, though, are the retired, and 6.9% don't pay taxes because they're either they're too poor, earning under $20,000 a year. However, there's also less than 1% that falls into the other category of those who pay no tax, who actually have very high incomes, usually more than $200,000 per year. John Feehery, though, is there no sense of the irony when he says things like this of a man who himself is paying a lower tax rate in capital gains taxes than many of those who aren't paying income taxes but who are paying payroll taxes?
Listen, I'm a Mitt Romney supporter, but his math is awfully fuzzy. If you're talking about, and it's true that Barack Obama probably is going to automatically get about 45 to 46% of the vote. That's probably indisputable. The problem for him is it's not the same people who aren't paying taxes. As you pointed out, you got a lot of senior citizens who want to vote for Romney because they don't like Barack Obama. And, this kind of rhetoric doesn't help him. So to Scott's earlier point, he's made a lot of verbal gaffes that have kind of derailed his campaign. He's got to get his act together. He's got to get his story straight, and he's got to start, if he wants to win this election, he's got to get on a better script.
John Nichols, it's interesting because this kind of rhetoric has worked in the past amongst his base, and particularly his base amongst that 47%, because many simply don't feel when Republicans say things like this that they're being referred to. They don't think it's their mother being referred to on Medicare. In fact, it's often alleged the assumption is that when statements like this are made, it's African Americans or Latinos or minorities who are being referred to.
I think there's an element of that. And one of the important things to understand here is that Mitt Romney was not thinking for himself in this circumstance. While I agree with Scott that he may actually believe this, he was really restating what is a very common talking point of the far-right talk radio, far-right blogosphere, which suggests that America is teetering on the brink because some huge portion of the populace has become what Paul Ryan refers to as a dependency culture or a dependency community. The problem with this calculus is that it's entirely false. It's entirely wrong. The truth is, as you've somewhat stated here, that 47% includes the working mom who gets up at 6 in the morning, gets her kids off to school, takes a bus across town, works through the day, and then rushes back to pick up her kids, drop them off at a daycare, and then goes back to another job. These are some of the hardest working people in America. Now, they do get some tax breaks, like Mitt Romney gets a lot of tax breaks. But the interesting thing is that the tax breaks that they get were formulated and really conceptualized by Republicans. In fact, Jack Kemp was one of the great advocates for many, many years for the idea that it was better for someone to work at a low wage and not pay taxes than to have them go on welfare or to, in other ways, be in a non-work situation. So Mitt Romney is foolishly and really crudely attacking concepts that wise conservative Republicans put into place a long time ago. And I think it speaks to the incoherence of his campaign. He should not be taking his talking points as the Republican nominee for President of the United States from the real fringe of his own party. He ought to be speaking somewhat more to the mainstream, and I think this will damage him a lot.
Well, we'll see whether we'll discuss whether this really is just the fringe of the party in a moment. But actually, John Feehery, as a Republican strategist, are you concerned now that some in the Republican base are beginning to wonder whether, when Republicans use this kind of language, they are talking, in fact, about them? They're not talking about Latinos. They're not talking about African Americans.
It's a little bit of a concern when you have senior citizens that pay no income taxes, and you know. To Scott's point, or to John's point, when I worked from the House of Representatives, we passed tax cuts that wiped off a lot of people at the lower end of these tax rolls. So that was part of our strategy to make sure that they didn't pay taxes, and we actually increased the EITC for a lot of these folks. So we got to be real careful.
The earned income tax credit.
Earned income tax credit. So Mitt Romney's got to be real careful when he's talking about these things, that he knows what he's talking about. And I think that this is, to John's point, one of the reasons that Mitt Romney is being held back right now is people don't think he's credible enough to be president. He's got to be more coherent in his arguments, be more careful in what he says.
But Scott Helman, there, is it just the fringe, though, who think that there's this entitlement culture and that, for example, that the rich are under attack? Clearly Romney was saying that at that dinner precisely because the sort of people who have the money to give him to donate to the campaign do believe there's a class war underway. And indeed, we've heard many Republicans say, actually, Romney should be using this to go on the offensive now.
Well, it's certainly true that there are people beyond just the fringe who think that we live in this dependency society, who are critical of government spending and deficit spending and so forth. I think the problem, and look, there's a way to talk about all of this, I think, in a way that's more sensitive and more nuanced and reflects a broader understanding of the tax system and the mother that John's talking about who gets up, that a broader understanding of who makes up these different groups. And Romney has just shown an inability, I think, to discuss these things because he comes across as so strident. And this has been going on for months. I mean, remember, week after week in the primary campaign, how many times were we talking about Mitt Romney making some remark about, he was betting Rick Perry $10,000,
right,
or he was saying, oh, he didn't make very much money in speaking fees. Well, it was $375,000. I mean, all of these things from January, and now it's September. Here we are still talking about Mitt Romney's inability to connect with middle-class voters and an apparent lack of understanding of their lives.
Well, that's the point, Scott. I mean, as his biographer, you're perhaps the best person to ask about this. These aren't simply gaffes. Do they actually sincerely reflect not just his worldview, but actually the sort of, wealthy donors that he's talking to in that room? That, he doesn't really understand the poor, or he does think that they are just one element of society as we get the economy hopefully to grow one day.
Yeah, I think this shows that he has a very narrow view of the electorate. And it's fairly shocking that here we are in a general election campaign with a, pretty good chance to dislodge a sitting president. And here we still are talking about taxes and Mitt Romney's, speaking to the 1%. I've been thinking in the last couple weeks, not just in light of this, but also in light of his ill-advised comments about the ambassador's death in Libya, what his father would have made of it, because Mitt Romney has always been so conscious of avoiding the mistakes of his father, George Romney, who failed in his presidential bid in large part because of his own blunt-spoken ways. Mitt Romney's whole political career in many ways has been designed to avoid these kind of revelations, and it doesn't appear to be working, and here we are, 6 weeks out from the election.
Right, his father, of course, his presidential campaign was derailed by a similarly intemperate comment, Scott.
Exactly. Famously, he said he had been brainwashed by the generals in Vietnam. That did not sit well among the Republican electorate, and he lost the primary that year in 1968, ultimately to Richard Nixon.
But John, just to get back to this idea then, given Mitt Romney is trying so hard then to have such a careful campaign, when we do see videos of what he says behind closed doors, are we finally getting an understanding not just of his worldview, but also of how the 1% does look at the rest of society and what his economic policies might look like? It seems very much, at least certainly from the biographies, like Scott Helman's biography of Romney, he was very much influenced by management theory about the creative destruction and so forth. And in these contexts, creative destruction does mean the 47%. They have to be sacrificed, perhaps.
Well, I think we have to be very, very careful about having too sort of cliched a view of the very wealthy. Remember that as we speak, a huge number of the wealthiest people in America, in an initiative I think launched by Bill Gates, are talking about giving up, massive portions of their wealth when they die, so that it can be used for the public good. So, the fact is there are many, many very wealthy people.
Right, but the wealthy who are backing Romney and whose interests Romney will be serving and so forth.
But even they, I suspect, are a little more nuanced than Mitt Romney was in those comments. These were ridiculous comments, frankly, made by a man who I think is completely out of touch with his own values and with himself. Scott's written a wonderful biography, and there have been other good examinations of him. I've spent a lot of my time writing about politics, writing about the decline of moderate republicanism. And Mitt Romney's dad, George Romney, aside from the family connection, would not be backing Mitt Romney at this point. He would see Mitt Romney as someone who is not ready to be president of the United States. Remember that while we talk about gaffes on the part of Mitt Romney's dad, the fact of the matter was that he often risked his political career to stand up to extremists and frankly to reactionaries within his own party. He refused to back Barry Goldwater for president in 1964 because he thought Barry Goldwater was not committed enough to civil rights. George Romney marched with civil rights campaigners.
All right.
He was himself an anti-poverty campaigner. And so I think Mitt Romney was raised in that culture. He has decided he wants to try and become a player in the Republican Party. The party no longer respects that tradition. And so my sense is that Mitt Romney struggles on a daily basis to know how to answer questions and how to speak about issues because he was raised, and in fact, as a younger man, had relatively liberal values. And now he's had to wedge them into the narrow confines of a Republican Party that simply has very, very little regard for the struggles of a lot of working Americans.
But Scott, again, just to return to you briefly, I mean, as his biographer, is it really like that, or is he out of touch? Is he struggling, or does he deeply have these views? Again, partly influenced by management theory and his own experiences and his sense of the rich's entitlement, perhaps, in society.
Well, I mean, I think John's point is a salient one. I mean, he is uncomfortable in many settings. We've seen this evolution in Mitt Romney from 1994, his first foray into politics, to now, and it does seem like he is answering questions sometimes, trying to figure out kind of what my current position is and how is this consistent with the political candidate I am today. So yes, I think he did take away certainly some things from his long career as a private equity executive that might be consistent with his remarks today. But I also think that he is in some ways just, you know, lost track of that political education that he had growing up and as a young political candidate, and now is saying things on the campaign trail that, you know, not only would have George Romney opposed, but the Mitt Romney of 1994 or 2002 would oppose. So it's a very striking evolution, and one ultimately that, you know, I think it risks his own political defeat in November, given that we keep seeing him appeal to a smaller and smaller slice of the electorate.
But John Feehery, again, as a Republican strategist, clearly you're aware of that shift in the language being used by the Republican Party. But is it simply fringes? Is it simply some elements of the donors, perhaps, or is this actually a deeply held belief about the encroachment of the entitlement society, you know, coming to get the haves?
Look, the Republicans care deeply about the debt bomb that's coming. They care about the idea that Medicare and Social Security are growing out of control, will take up 50% of the budget. This is something that concerns someone like Paul Ryan. I think that when Mitt Romney picked Paul Ryan to be his running mate, that he put it at the top of his list. And you know, we have to come to grips with the spending in the government.
Right, but by cutting taxes on the rich, perhaps increasing them on the poor,
I think
bloating defense spending even further, not really reducing the deficit at all, in fact.
Well, I think what they believe, and I agree with them, is that if you have economic growth, you help grow yourself out of this debt, but you also have to cut spending. And I think that there's some
but creative destruction meaning the poor.
Well, I don't think creative destruction means the poor. I think that the fact of the matter is that John Kennedy said rising tide lifts all boats, and I think that that's what they believe in, a growing economy. And the other fact is that over the last 4 years we've had a failing economy. The poor are getting poorer under Barack Obama. To say that economic model works is not true.
Well, let's move on to the comments he made about foreign policy. John Nichols, so far a lot of attention on his comments about the Israeli-Palestinian situation, conflict. Although having said that, though, isn't that just a refreshing bit of honesty? Hasn't President Obama simply kicked the can down the road as well? There's no intention of having an equitable two-state solution on the part of Israel or the US for pushing Israel. So actually, well, maybe some actually, even on the Palestinian side, are saying, well, you know, at least that was honest.
Well, I worry about giving people credit for being honest about, quote-unquote, honest about policies that seem so unnuanced. The fact of the matter is that the United States has not had a president since George Herbert Walker Bush, Father Bush, who was really committed to trying to achieve a solution in the Middle East. President Clinton, President George W. Bush, President Obama have been weak players in this regard and often misguided. But even there, they've still at least tried to acknowledge the complexities of the region. I think that with Mitt Romney, it's very, very troubling that he went to the Middle East. He made a rather high-profile tour, and he actually skipped chances to have meetings with Palestinian leaders, as well as with members of the Israeli peace camp, in order to hold fundraisers in Jerusalem. And I'm afraid that that's really the heart of it. I'm not sure that Mitt Romney has deeply held views about the Middle East. I think, however, that he is, again, reflecting positions that have become very, very popular within the base of his party. The fact of the matter is that I wish that he had had broader meetings when he was in the Middle East, and not just with Palestinians, also with Israelis who would tell him that the idea of a two-state solution is not a notion that is somehow anti-Israel that Friends of Israel cannot hold. That in fact, there are many, many prominent Israelis, some of the leading Israeli political figures who favor a two-state solution. And to have Romney go to such extremes, it puts him into a camp, not just in America, that I think is a bit on the fringe, but also even in mainstream Israeli culture.
A great deal of concern currently.
So rejectionist.
A great deal of concern currently on a possible Israeli strike on Iran. Here's how Mitt Romney discussed Iran at this meeting with donors.
If I were Iran, I mean, and a crazed fanatic, I'd say let's get a little missile material to Hezbollah, have them carry it to Chicago or some other place, and then if anything goes wrong or America starts acting up, we'll just say, hey, guess what? Unless you stand down, why, we're going to let off a dirty bomb. I mean, this is where we head, where America can be held up and blackmailed by Iran, by the mullahs, by crazy people. So we really don't have any option but to keep Iran from having a nuclear weapon.
Scott Helman, from what you know about Mitt Romney's worldview, I mean, talking about crazy mullahs giving Hezbollah a dirty bomb to plant in Chicago, I mean, what does that mean? Does that mean a more proactive attack on Iran, or is he playing to the gallery? What do you think is going on there?
Yeah, I don't really know, to be honest. I mean, clearly he is playing to his audience, as John said. I mean, this is having a very hard line against Iran, outspoken support for Israel. These have been cornerstones of his foreign policy views, I guess, for several years, and he has made, great hay, for example, about when there was an occasion where the former premier of Iran, Mohammad Khatami, was coming to speak at Harvard when Mitt Romney was governor. He made a big show about refusing state police protection for him. So, I mean, this is something that as Mitt Romney has begun to seek a broader voice on the national stage, he's tried to make his name really attacking the, Islamic fundamentalism and the jihadists. I mean, of course, it's a very easy position to take. And I was really struck in those comments, not so much about Iran, but just how defeatist he seemed to be about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, saying that basically the Palestinians are not interested in peace. Let's just not pretend that anymore. And we're just going to have to hope to contain this problem. I mean, those comments, I think, would be very problematic coming back to haunt a Mitt Romney were he to win the presidency.
Okay, what about the political fallout altogether, taken as a whole, John Feehery? Republican grandees, are they fretting yet? Are they thinking, look, let's just go for congressional races? No, Romney isn't. I mean, we weren't too crazy about him in the first place.
I don't think that Republicans are ready to throw in the towel on the Romney campaign. I think if you look at the polls, they're still within the margin of error. You still have 3 debates where things could change. He is saying a lot of these comments do strike a chord with a lot of conservatives from the foreign policy and with the domestic policy comments. I think that in many ways this tape is going to help energize the Republican base. In a way. Well, they're going to be more excited about Mitt Romney, and the more that he's attacked by the media, the more that they're going to like Romney. So even
as they realize they are the 47% he's referring to.
They won't realize that. What they'll realize is that Romney's for them, and they're against Obama, and they'll be juiced up because this is how it works. You get the media attacking someone like Romney, and they don't believe the media. So I think that at the end of the day, this election is going to be more determined by the 3 debates than by this videotape.
John Nichols, is it too early to tell? Still 7 weeks till the election, after all, and we see incidents like this, which in the end, don't really have much of an effect. What do you think?
I think this has been a really bad 3 weeks for Mitt Romney, and they came at exactly the wrong time for him. He had a convention that was not as successful as he would have liked. Too many people came out talking about Clint Eastwood yelling at a chair, not enough talking about Mitt Romney's speech. The Democrats had a convention that was highly effective and very strong on messaging, especially to some battleground states like Michigan. Then you had a bad foreign policy stumble in the aftermath of the Libya events, and then finally these taped revelations. It's a bad pattern for Mitt Romney. William Kristol, one of the leading Republican kind of commentators, former Bush the father White House aide, said that Romney was stupid and arrogant. When you have someone like William Kristol referring to Mitt Romney as stupid and arrogant, that would tell you that major Republicans are deeply concerned about this campaign. There's still time for Mitt Romney to do a reset, campaigns have done that in the past. But if Mitt Romney does not get control of his campaign and pivot out of what really is a downward spiral at this point, it's not just he that might be defeated. There is a real possibility that he could do damage to Republicans down ticket. That concern is clearly alive
in the congressional races. All right, John Nichols.
Republican strategists.
Thank you very much. John Nichols, John Feehery, and Scott Helman, thank you all very much. And that's all from the team in Washington, D.C. for now.